Liang Wei had never imagined his life would one day lead him to a wooden cabin in the mountains, far from noise, deadlines, and crowded streets. For most of his adult years, he had been the kind of man who believed that success meant constant movement. His co-workers used to say that he walked fast, talked fast, and even ate fast. That was simply the rhythm of his life in Guangzhou, a city that seemed to grow taller and louder every year. But over time, that rhythm became too heavy, and the weight of it slowly pressed down on him in ways he did not notice at first. Every morning, he woke to alarms that felt like tiny hammers in his ears. He rode the crowded subway with hundreds of others who also looked tired, each person staring at their phone or closing their eyes while standing. Liang used to enjoy the feeling of being part of something bigger, a busy world full of ambition. But as the years passed, that excitement changed into something else. He started skipping breakfast, sleeping less, and working late as if it were normal. The simple things like feeling the sun on his face during a morning walk or listening to the sound of rain with a quiet mind became rare gifts he didn't have time for. He found himself missing those moments more and more, but he didn't know how to return to them. One evening, after a long meeting that stretched 2 hours past the end of the workday, Liang stayed in the empty office by himself. The cleaning staff had already left. The lights buzzed softly overhead. He stared at the city skyline through the window, tall buildings glowing like giants made of glass, and felt something strange. It wasn't sadness, and it wasn't exactly anger. It was a deep, quiet emptiness that made him pause. He wondered when he had last felt truly alive. That night, he walked home instead of taking the train. The city was bright, and the sidewalks were full of people. But Liang felt separate from all of it, like he was watching a movie instead of living inside his own life. When he reached his apartment, he didn't turn on the lights. He sat in the dark, listening to the hum of traffic through his window, and realized something important. He needed a different life. He did not make the decision in one day. It took weeks of thinking, of imagining what would happen if he stepped away from everything he had built. His parents worried when he first mentioned it. His friends thought he was joking. His co-workers laughed and told him he would be bored after 1 week in the countryside. But Liang felt something inside him shifting, something gentle but firm, like a hand on his shoulder guiding him toward a new path. He began searching for places far from the city, places where the air was clean and the nights were quiet. He wanted a space where he could hear himself think again. Eventually, he found a small cabin in the mountains near the Yunnan border. The cabin had no fancy furniture, no large rooms, not even a steady internet connection. But it had a strong roof, a simple stove, and a small patch of land outside that could grow vegetables. Most importantly, it had peace. When he first arrived, he felt unsure. The silence was thicker than anything he had known in the city. Even the wind sounded louder here, brushing through the tall pine trees that surrounded the cabin. The air smelled of grass and wood, and every breath he took felt like it was clearing something old and heavy from his chest. His first few days were slow and a little awkward. He kept reaching for his phone out of habit, expecting messages, reminders, or notifications. But the screen remained blank. In a strange way, he felt relieved. He began waking up naturally with the sunrise, watching the light slowly fill his room. He made tea on the stove and sat outside to enjoy the morning air while listening to birds calling to one another. For the first time in years, he felt like time was moving at a human pace. The locals were friendly but cautious at first. They were used to travelers passing through, but not many stayed for long. Liang was polite, always greeting them with a smile and buying his vegetables at the small weekly market. Over time, they warmed up to him. An old man who sold apples told him stories about the mountain's history. A woman from the tea stall gave him tips on how to grow vegetables in cold weather. Children waved at him on the road. Yet despite these interactions, Liang remained mostly alone by choice and by comfort. His days became a quiet routine that suited him well. He woke early, tended to his small garden, cooked simple meals, and explored the forest trails that curled like ribbons through the mountains. He discovered hidden streams, smooth stones warmed by the sun, and viewpoints that made him gasp with wonder every time. Each evening, he lit a small lamp inside the cabin and read books he had brought with him, stories he never had time for in the city. Sometimes he wrote in a notebook, not because he needed to keep records, but because it felt good to let his thoughts spill out in slow, careful words. He was not running away from life, he was rediscovering it. The change in him was subtle but steady. His shoulders relaxed, his mind quieted, and his heart felt less heavy. He no longer woke with a tightness in his chest. Instead, he woke with a calm curiosity about what the day might bring. The mountains seemed to offer him something he had long forgotten: space to breathe, space to think, and space simply to exist. There were days when he wondered if he should miss the city. But even on those days, the quiet around him felt like a gentle reassurance that he was exactly where he needed to be. He noticed things he had once ignored: the soft rustle of leaves when a breeze passed, the distant call of an animal in the evening, the way the sky changed colors at sunset. Everything felt slower, softer, and more meaningful. Sometimes he thought about the person he used to be, the man who had rushed through life without noticing the world around him. But he did not judge that version of himself. Instead, he saw him as someone who needed rest, someone who needed to step outside the noise to understand what truly mattered. Months passed, and Liang grew comfortable with his new life. He had no plans to return to the city anytime soon. He believed he had found the peace he had been searching for. But mountains have a way of bringing the unexpected. Even in the quietest places, life can shift in an instant, offering surprises that test the very choices a person makes. Liang did not know it yet, but his peaceful mountain life was about to cross paths with a moment he could never have predicted. A moment that would challenge both his solitude and his quiet strength. For now, though, he lived each day with gentle appreciation, unaware that one night, long after sunset, a knock on his cabin door would change everything. As the months passed, Liang's new life in the mountains settled into a peaceful rhythm. Yet even peace had small ripples, and every so often, something in the village reminded him that the world beyond his cabin was not always simple. Whenever he walked down to the weekly market, he noticed the way people spoke to one another softly, sometimes with concern in their eyes, as if they shared news that carried a quiet weight. Liang did not try to listen in. But in a small mountain village, sounds traveled easily. Voices mixed with the rustling of leaves and the calls of animals. Sellers arranged their produce while customers chatted about weather changes, harvest seasons, and the price of dried mushrooms. But now and then, a different topic floated through the air: talk of unusual happenings in the valley beyond the mountains. One morning, while choosing fresh tomatoes from a wooden basket, Liang heard two women speaking just a few steps away. Their tone was gentle, but worried. "Another group passed through last night," one whispered. "Really? So late?" "Yes, they looked tired. Maybe travelers who lost their way. The mountains can confuse people unfamiliar with the paths." Liang glanced over, but the women quickly shifted the topic when they noticed him. He didn't take it personally. Villagers often protected their stories, especially with someone who still felt like an outsider. But the mention of lost travelers stayed in his mind. On another day, while drinking tea at a small roadside stall, he overheard a group of elders. Their conversation was slow, punctuated by long pauses. As older people often spoke, "These hills are tricky during the rainy season," one man said. "People keep wandering into the wrong places." "Strange, isn't it?" Another replied. "So many unfamiliar faces passing through lately. I wonder where they're coming from." "Just people in need of help, I suppose." The mountains never turn away those who are looking for a safe path. Liang stirred his tea quietly, absorbing the tone more than the words. It wasn't fear, just concern, like people watching clouds gather and wondering when the rain would start. He asked the tea seller, a cheerful middle-aged woman, "Has something been happening nearby?" She smiled kindly. "Nothing dangerous. Don't worry. Just more travelers than usual. Maybe people are searching for work, or for relatives, or for calmer places to stay. You know how life is, sometimes people drift like leaves in the wind." Her answer was simple, but Liang sensed that she knew more. After all, he had come to the mountains to free himself from questions, not gather more. As he walked back up the trail toward his cabin, he thought about the idea of people drifting. In a way, he too had drifted away from city noise, away from deadlines, toward a quieter life where he could hear his own footsteps. Perhaps he was not so different from the people mentioned in the village market. But the slight tension in the villagers' voices kept echoing in his mind. It wasn't fear, and it wasn't gossip. It was more like people wanting to help, but not knowing how to. That feeling created a thin thread of curiosity in Liang, even though he didn't want to be pulled into anything complicated. Days later, during a walk near a narrow mountain path, Liang noticed footprints on the ground. They looked fresh, different sizes, some light, some heavier. It was not unusual for hikers to come through, but something about the pattern made him pause. The footprints were scattered, as if the group had moved without a clear direction. Perhaps they had been searching for a safe resting place. He knelt down, brushing aside leaves to look more closely. The soil here was soft after recent rain, making it easy to see the impressions. But he didn't want to assume anything. Footprints alone couldn't tell a full story. Still, as he walked back to his cabin, the air felt different. Quiet, yes, but filled with a gentle alertness, as if the mountains themselves were paying attention to something unseen. Over the next 2 weeks, similar signs appeared: a scarf stuck in a low branch, a water bottle left beside a rock, distant voices drifting through the trees at unusual hours. None of these things were alarming by themselves. Many hopeful travelers wandered these paths every season, looking for opportunity or trying to reconnect with family in another town. Mountains were known to give shelter to people between destinations. Yet Liang felt something slowly weaving through the days, a pattern he could not quite name. Every time he returned to the village, he heard more quiet talk. One afternoon, he stopped at the fruit stall run by an elderly couple. While checking peaches, he noticed the old man giving directions to a young pair of travelers. His voice was calm, but his eyes showed a hint of worry. "Always stay on the wide path," the old man said. "The smaller ones twist and turn. It's easy to end up somewhere you didn't mean to be." The travelers nodded politely before moving on. Liang paid for his peaches, but before he walked away, the old man said gently, "You live higher up the mountain, don't you?" "Yes," Liang answered. "Near the pine forest." The old man nodded slowly. "Then keep your lamp on at night. Sometimes, people walking after dark look for the nearest light. It helps them understand where they are." Liang thanked him, but the comment stayed with him all the way home. He imagined people walking tired and uncertain through the hills, searching for a small glow to guide them. The image was simple, but powerful. A lamp could be more than just light, it could be comfort for someone who had lost their way. That night, he kept his lamp lit longer than usual. The soft yellow glow filled the cabin windows, spilling out onto the quiet forest path. He sat inside reading, unaware that the gentle circle of light around his home had already begun to draw curious eyes in the distance. He found himself thinking more often about the travelers the villagers mentioned. Who were they? Where were they going? What had brought them through the mountains at odd hours? The story remained unclear. But Liang trusted that the mountains had their own way of guiding people. If someone needed help, the path would lead them to where they needed to be. One evening at the market, he asked the tea seller casually, "Do you think many more people will pass through?" She shrugged lightly. "Hard to say. When the seasons change, people move. When jobs shift, people move. When hearts feel restless, people move. The mountains are gentle. They let people pass without asking for reasons. Her words softened something in Liang. They made him feel less uneasy about the small mysteries unfolding around him. Perhaps there was no danger at all, just stories of people searching for better days. Still, every time he returned home, he noticed himself listening more carefully. The forest had a different tone at night, as if carrying distant footsteps. The wind seemed to bring whispers of paths crossed by many travelers. One night, he stepped outside and looked up at the sky. Stars sparkled clearly above the treetops, and the air was cool and still. He breathed deeply, letting the mountain calm settle inside him. Even with the strange hints of movement around him, he felt safe. The mountains had always embraced the lost, the tired, and the wandering. They had once embraced him too. Liang had no idea that the gentle signs, the footprints, the whispers, the villagers' concern, were slowly preparing him for something unusual. Something that would come, not with fear, but with a quiet urgency. Something that would knock on his door at a time when most people were fast asleep. For now, he only sensed a shift in the air, like a soft hum beneath the calm surface of his quiet life. He did not know that soon, the peaceful patterns of his mountain days would take an unexpected turn, one that would test his kindness, his patience, and the calm strength he had built within himself. The night started like any other peaceful evening in Liang's mountain cabin. After dinner, he sat near the small wooden table, reading a book by the soft glow of his lamp. Outside, the wind brushed through the tall pines, creating a soothing, whisper-like sound. The mountains always became wonderfully quiet at night, and Liang had grown to love that silence. It made him feel protected, as if the world had placed a blanket over everything. The air held a coolness that hinted at early winter. Liang set his book aside and stepped outside for a moment to breathe in the fresh night air. The sky was a deep blue, sprinkled with stars that seemed brighter than usual. He wrapped his hands around his mug of warm tea and smiled to himself. It was simple nights like this, quiet, calm, and gentle, that made him grateful for the life he had chosen. After finishing his tea, he went indoors and lit a small lamp near the window, remembering the old man's advice about leaving a light on for travelers. To him, it felt like a small kindness, a way of telling the world that this little cabin was a safe point in the dark forest. Time passed slowly. Liang changed into comfortable clothes and prepared for bed. He blew out one lamp, but left the window lamp glowing softly. Just as he lay down, pulling the blanket over himself, a strange sound drifted through the quiet. It wasn't loud, but it didn't belong to the forest. It was soft, nervous, almost hesitant, like someone gently tapping on wood. He sat up, listening carefully. Another tap followed. Then another. At first, he wondered if it might be a branch brushing against the cabin wall, moved by a sudden breeze. But the sound was too steady, too intentional. It was a knock at his door. Liang's heart jumped, not from fear, but from surprise. He lived deep in the mountains, and people rarely came by after sunset. Even during the day, visitors were uncommon. He slipped on his shoes, wrapped a light jacket around himself, and walked quietly toward the door. The knocking stopped as he approached, as if the person outside sensed movement inside. He hesitated for just a moment, then opened the wooden door gently. What he saw made him blink with confusion. On his porch stood 6 women, all looking tired, dusty from long walking, and clearly relieved to see him. Their clothes were simple and practical, as if they had been traveling for many days. Some carried small bags. Others clutched jackets around themselves to stay warm. Their faces held softness, not fear, just the exhaustion of having walked too far in unfamiliar terrain. The woman in front, perhaps the oldest among them, stepped forward with a polite bow of her head. Her voice trembled slightly, not because she was scared, but because she seemed out of breath. We're very sorry to disturb you at this hour," she said gently. We lost our way on the mountain trail. Your light guided us here. We, 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 we light. We lost our way on the mountain trail. Liang felt his chest warm with sympathy. He opened the door wider, letting the warm air from inside drift out. It's all right, he said calmly. The 6 women exchanged grateful glances before stepping inside the cabin. As they entered, they removed their shoes near the door, trying not to bring dirt onto the wooden floor. Liang hurried to the shelf and pulled out extra blankets, placing them on the chairs and benches. Please sit, he offered. The women settled down, their shoulders relaxing as they finally allowed themselves to rest. The cabin suddenly felt full, not crowded, but gently alive, in a way it hadn't in a long time. Liang warmed water on the stove and poured hot tea for each of them. They accepted the cups with both hands, thanking him in soft voices. Steam rose into the air, mixing with the faint scent of pine that always lingered in the cabin. Once everyone seemed comfortable, Liang sat across from them. You walked here at night? He asked gently. The youngest woman nodded. We were following the main trail earlier, but it became hard to see after sunset. We thought we could reach the next village, but the path divided into too many small ones. We didn't want to keep going in the dark, so we walked toward your light. And we are very grateful you had it on. Liang felt humbled. Something so small leaving a lamp on had helped more than he expected. He placed a small basket of bread and fruit on the table. Please eat, he said. You don't need to explain anything until you are rested. But the women started thanking him immediately. We didn't plan to walk so late, one explained. We were visiting a relative in the low valley. She insisted we stay overnight, but we wanted to continue our journey. It got dark quicker than we expected, and the mist covered the trail for a while, said another. We could barely see each other at one point. Liang nodded. Mountain weather was unpredictable. A sudden mist or drop in temperature could confuse even experienced hikers. You're safe now, he said softly. You can stay here until morning. The path will be clear in daylight. The women looked visibly relieved. They ate slowly, savoring every bite as if it were a treasure. The warmth of the cabin, the comfort of being indoors, and the friendly presence of Liang seemed to lift their spirits completely. As the tea warmed their hands and the blankets softened their tired backs, the women grew more talkative. They told Liang about their trip, a simple journey meant to reconnect with family and explore the countryside together. They enjoyed traveling, but the mountain pathways had surprised them with their twists. They laughed softly about how they kept choosing the wrong turn despite holding a map. We're not very good at reading maps, one admitted with a playful grin, and the others chuckled. Liang smiled. Their energy, despite their exhaustion, filled the room with warmth. It felt like having gentle guests, unexpected but welcome. He noticed how polite they were, how careful not to intrude too much on his space. They kept thanking him repeatedly, which made him feel almost embarrassed. You don't need to thank me so many times, he said. Anyone would have helped. The oldest woman shook her head. Not everyone leaves a light in the window. Sometimes the smallest kindness becomes a guide. Her words touched him deeply, reminding him of the old man's advice from the village. As the night grew colder, Liang prepared sleeping spaces for his unexpected guests. He gave them his own bedding and took a blanket for himself, planning to sleep on the small wooden bench. But the women protested immediately. You should stay in your own bed, they insisted. We can share the space here. Liang laughed softly. It's all right. I'm used to simple sleeping arrangements. Once everyone settled in, the cabin became quiet again. The women whispered softly among themselves, expressing gratitude for finding a safe place. Their voices blended gently with the sounds of the night wind. Liang lay awake for a while, listening to the soft rhythm of their breathing. It felt different to have people here, to know his little cabin had helped travelers who needed warmth and rest. He felt humbled and strangely connected, as if the mountains had trusted him with this small responsibility. Outside, the forest remained peaceful and calm, the moon casting silver light over the treetops. Inside, 6 tired women slept safely, wrapped in blankets and comfort. Liang closed his eyes, unaware that this night was just the beginning. The knock on his door had changed the rhythm of his quiet mountain life gently, unexpectedly, and in a way he would soon understand more deeply. When morning arrived, the first light of dawn slipped gently through the wooden shutters of Liang's cabin. The mountains were quiet, wrapped in a soft layer of mist that floated between the trees like pale cotton. Birds began their early songs, adding a peaceful music to the stillness. Liang woke before the 6 women, as he usually rose early. He sat up quietly, careful not to disturb them. They slept on the mats and blankets he had arranged on the floor, their faces calm, the tired lines from the previous night softened by rest. For a moment, Liang simply watched them with a thoughtful expression. It amazed him how life could change so suddenly. One night he was alone, living a simple routine, and the next he was sharing his cabin with strangers who now felt almost familiar. He went outside for a moment to breathe the cool morning air. The mountain breeze carried the scent of pine and earth, steadying his mind. When he stepped back inside, he began to prepare breakfast: steamed buns, boiled eggs, and a pot of warm porridge. It was not fancy, but it was comforting. Slowly, the women woke up one by one. Some stretched with small groans. Others blinked sleepily until they remembered where they were. When they saw Liang preparing breakfast, they immediately tried to help. "Oh no, please let us assist you," one insisted. "You already helped us so much," another added. Liang smiled and shook his head. "It's all right. You are guests. Please just relax." But the women insisted on helping with small tasks, setting dishes on the table, pouring tea, arranging the blankets. Soon, the cabin felt full again, warm, with quiet chatter and soft laughter. Even though they had been strangers only hours earlier, they now felt like a small group of friends sharing a peaceful morning. While they ate, the oldest woman gently asked, "Will it be easy to return to the main path from here?" "Yes," Liang replied. "In the daylight, everything is clear. I can show you the start of the trail." The women exchanged relieved smiles. They were eager to continue their journey, but none of them showed the worry they had carried the night before. Rest had given their faces new color and calmness. After breakfast, one of the younger women looked around the cabin with a curious smile. "You live here alone?" she asked. "Yes," Liang answered. "It's quiet, but I like it." Another woman asked, "Don't you get lonely?" Liang paused, thinking carefully before he replied. "I came here because I needed peace, and when I miss people, I go down to the village. But days like yesterday remind me that the world still finds its way to my door." The women nodded, understanding him more than he expected. Sometimes, people searched for quiet, not because they disliked company, but because their hearts needed space to breathe. After everyone finished eating, Liang packed a small bag with snacks and a thermos of tea for them to take on their journey. He also gave them a simple hand-drawn map showing the main trail and landmarks they could follow. The women were touched by the gesture. "You are very kind," one said. "You helped us more than you know." Before they left, they insisted on cleaning the cabin. Liang tried to refuse, but they would not hear of it. They swept the floor, folded the bedding, and washed the dishes until the cabin looked even tidier than before. Their gratitude filled the room with a warm, appreciative energy. Finally, it was time to go. The women gathered their bags, wrapped their jackets tightly, and stepped out onto the porch. The morning sun had begun to break through the mist, painting the forest in soft gold. I'll walk with you for a while, Liang said. Just until the trail becomes easy to follow. The group began walking together through the forest. The air was cool, and the ground was still damp from the night. Birds flew between the branches, and sunlight filtered through the leaves in thin beams. The women spoke quietly among themselves, admiring the beauty of the morning. They soon reached a fork in the path, the place where the women had become confused the night before. In the daylight, it looked simple enough, but Liang understood how darkness and mist could make everything unclear. This is where you turn left, he explained. From here, the trail widens. It will lead you directly to the next village. The women examined the path carefully, as if memorizing every detail. Thank you, the oldest woman said softly. We would have been wandering for hours without your help. One of the younger women added playfully. We might have built a tent in the forest and stayed there forever. Everyone laughed. And even Liang couldn't hold back a smile. They stood there for a moment, quietly absorbing the feeling of parting. It was strange how close they felt after such a short time. Kindness had a way of creating connections faster than anything else. The women thanked him once more, bowing slightly in respect. Liang returned the gesture with a gentle nod. Take care, he said. The weather should stay clear today, so you'll be fine. If you ever come near our town, another woman added warmly, you must visit us. We will make you a big meal. Liang promised to consider it, even though he knew he rarely traveled far from the mountains. One by one, the women walked down the path, waving until they disappeared behind a curve lined with tall trees. Their voices faded into the distance, replaced once again by the soft sounds of the forest. When they were finally out of sight, Liang remained standing at the fork for a while. The forest felt different now, fuller, as if the presence of the women had left behind a gentle echo of warmth. He took a slow breath, allowing the peace of the moment to settle into him. On his walk back to the cabin, thoughts drifted through his mind like clouds. He thought about how life always carried surprises, even in quiet places. He thought about the small choices people made, like leaving a lamp on, and how those choices could change someone else's journey. He also thought about the women's courage. They had walked through uncertainty with hope, trusting the faint glow of a distant cabin. Their trust in him had touched something deep inside, a feeling of responsibility, of quiet strength he didn't realize he had. When he reached his cabin, he saw the empty room, the cleaned table, the neatly folded blankets. It was quiet again, just as it had been before they came. Yet something inside him felt different now. The cabin no longer felt like a place tucked away from the world. Instead, it felt connected to something bigger. The long paths people walked, the stories they carried, the gentle ways lives crossed unexpectedly. He sat on the wooden bench outside and watched the sunlight slowly climb higher through the trees. The mountains stood firm, as calm and steady as always. But Liang's heart felt softer, more open. He knew the women's journey would continue safely now. And he knew his own journey, the quiet, simple one he had chosen, had expanded in a meaningful way. The mountains had given him peace, but they had also given him a reminder. Even the quietest life can hold moments of importance, moments that shape who a person becomes. Liang leaned back and closed his eyes, feeling the warm sun on his face. He didn't know what else the mountains had in store for him, but he trusted that whatever came next would arrive gently, just like everything else had. Days passed quietly after the 6 women continued their journey. The mountain breeze returned to its normal whisper. The pine trees swayed softly, and the forest trails once again carried only the prints of animals and the occasional hiker. But something inside Liang had changed, even if his daily life looked the same on the surface. The first morning after they left, Liang walked outside and stood on the porch for a long moment, looking at the path the women had taken. The sunlight touched the leaves gently, and the forest seemed unusually peaceful, as if it remembered the warm energy of the unexpected guests. He found himself smiling without realizing it. He returned inside, made his breakfast, and cleaned the cabin. Everything was the same, yet the quietness felt different, not empty, but meaningful. The memory of the women's grateful smiles stayed with him, filling the air with a soft warmth. Throughout the week, people in the village began hearing about the women who had arrived safely, and some villagers quietly spread the story of how Liang had helped them. When he came down to the market, people greeted him with friendlier smiles than before. A few even nodded at him with a kind of respect he wasn't used to. "You helped those travelers, didn't you?" an elderly woman asked while handing him a bunch of green onions. "I only gave them a place to rest," Liang answered modestly. "That alone means a lot," she replied gently. "Kindness grows stronger when shared." Her words echoed in Liang's heart long after he returned to his mountain path. He didn't help for praise or recognition, but it touched him to know that his small actions had made a difference. As days turned into weeks, Liang found himself thinking about the women more often. He wondered where they were now, whether they had reached their destination, whether they were staying with their families, whether they sometimes remembered the small mountain cabin where they rested for a night. He imagined them laughing together under the open sky, sharing stories about their journey. The thought made him feel quietly happy. Over time, his cabin did not remain the solitary corner it once was. Word traveled slowly but steadily through the villages around the mountains, and soon more travelers began passing near his area. Some only waved from a distance. Others stopped to ask for directions. A few brought fruits or small gifts from their hometowns, saying they had heard that a helpful man lived near the pine forest. Liang accepted these small tokens with a humble heart. He never expected anything in return, but he appreciated the gentle connections that formed unexpectedly. His world was still quiet, still simple, but the quiet now carried the soft echo of human footsteps. Footsteps that felt welcome rather than intrusive. One afternoon, a young couple approached his cabin while he was working in his small vegetable patch. "Excuse us," the man said politely. "Are you Liang Wei?" Liang wiped his hands on a cloth and nodded. "My sister told me about you," the woman added with a bright smile. "She stayed here one night with some friends. She said, your kindness helped them more than you know. We came this way and wanted to say thank you." Liang was surprised and touched. They chatted for a while, and the couple continued their journey, leaving him with a sense of warmth that lasted long after they disappeared into the trees. Sometimes, hikers would stop by in the late afternoon to rest, sharing stories about different places they had visited. A few even asked Liang about his decision to live in the mountains. He always answered honestly, "I came here to find peace, and the mountains welcomed me." As he spoke, he often realized how true those words were, not just because the mountains were calm, but because they gave him moments like the night he helped the 6 women. They gave him reasons to feel connected again, reasons to understand both solitude and companionship. The villagers also became more comfortable with him. The tea seller at the market often set aside an extra cup of warm tea for him. The apple seller told him stories about past travelers who had visited the region. Children waved at him more eagerly as he passed by. The once lonely mountain trail now felt like a gentle bridge between Liang and the surrounding world. One cool morning, while watching the sunrise paint the sky in soft pink and orange, Liang reflected on everything that had happened. He thought about who he had been before coming to the mountains. The man who rushed through days, exhausted and disconnected. The man who had forgotten what it felt like to breathe deeply or to truly see the world around him. Then he thought about who he had become, someone who could sit still and appreciate the sound of the wind, someone who could welcome strangers into his home without hesitation, someone whose heart felt calmer and stronger. He realized that solitude had given him healing, but human connection had given him purpose. As seasons changed, his garden grew richer, his cabin cozier, and his days brighter. Occasionally, he would find a small note or gift left near his door by people he had helped. Sometimes it was a handmade cloth, sometimes a bag of fruit, sometimes a simple thank you letter. Each one felt like a tiny friendship, carried gently into his mountain life. One day, while sweeping the porch, Liang imagined what might have happened if he had ignored the knocking that night, if he had stayed in bed, or chosen not to open the door. The thought made him smile softly. Kindness returned is a quiet blessing, he murmured to himself. He understood now that life had a way of bringing unexpected moments to one's doorstep. Some moments arrived loudly, and others arrived gently in the form of 6 exhausted women seeking shelter on a dark night. The mountains remained peaceful, but Liang no longer felt like a man running away from the world. Instead, he felt like a guardian of a small, comforting corner, a place where weary travelers could find warmth, rest, and safety. Another winter approached, covering the mountaintops with a thin layer of snow. Liang prepared his cabin for the colder months, stacking firewood neatly and storing food. He added thicker blankets to the shelves, remembering how useful they had been the last time visitors stayed over. One evening, as he lit his lamp by the window, he paused for a long moment. He watched the soft glow spread across the clearing outside, creating a warm circle of light in the slowly darkening forest. He wondered if someone out there might be walking toward it right now, someone searching for direction, for comfort, or simply for a friendly face. If so, the lamp would guide them, just as it had guided the 6 women. And even if no one came tonight, the thought alone made him feel peaceful. Liang stepped back inside and closed the door gently behind him. He sat by his stove, warmed his hands, and allowed his heart to rest in the quiet understanding that life's most meaningful moments often come unexpectedly. The mountains had taught him that. He continued reading his book, listening to the crackling fire, fully content. Somewhere beyond the forest, the women he had helped were living their own lives, carrying his kindness with them like a fond memory. And here in the mountains, Liang carried their gratitude like a soft light in his heart. He chose a quiet life, but the world had still found its way to him, not to disturb his peace, but to remind him that even solitude can hold gentle connections. His story, once filled with exhaustion and hurry, had become a simple one of kindness, light, and calm strength. And he knew, deep in his heart, that if another knock came at midnight someday, he would open the door again,